Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. You are listening to our weekly class, Navigate and Master the Prayerbook, with Rabbi Cantor Hillary Chorny.
Last week in our class, we got into the meat of the Amidah, which I was really excited to do. I've been excited all along to get into that. We did a review last time of everything that had come up until that point, which was Birkot HaShachar, the blessings of the dawn, Pesukei de Zimra, which are the verses of song that mostly come from the book of songs and are our warm-up to weekday services. Birkot HaShachar is substantively the same as Shabbat mornings, but the music is different. Pesukei de Zimra is shorter on weekday mornings than it is on Shabbat, as are lots of elements of our weekday services as compared to Shabbat, because the idea is that we're keeping things tight. People have places to be after morning services. And then we got into Shacharit. And let's take a look at the outline as we're doing that. We got all the way through the part of Shacharit with the Amidah, but let's do a review of that content together. First, we start with Yishtabach, a couple of things that require a minyan, which includes the Chatzi Kaddish and the Baruch Hu, the call to worship. And we finish that with a blessing, with Yotzer Or, God being the creator of light and all things as well. You know, light and everything else. And then, structurally, we do the same thing at Shacharit as we do in Mariv, as I keep reiterating, this idea that we're sandwiching the Shema amidst a bunch of blessings. So we go through blessing number 1, which has this miniature Kedusha. If you go back to class number 2 of this siddur class and that recording, you can hear me get into the content that leads us between Yotzer Or and the actual Chatima, the actual end of the blessing that lands us at Or Chadash Al Tzion Ta'ir, right? A new light will shine over Zion. That's the first blessing of the 3. Then blessing number 2. Everybody's pretty familiar with that page because thanks to Rabbi Moshe Pomerantz and Carlbach, we have really popular melodies that go to those paragraphs. We often sing them on Shabbat. We don't usually sing them on weekday mornings, but it begins with Ahava Rabbah Ahavtanu and ends with God being the lover and the chooser of Israel into the Shema. And after the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, which we went over 2 classes ago as which is basically done as a private recitation. It's important to say every word privately. When we finish with that, we come out of the Shema to a 3rd blessing. Some paragraphs that focus on the concept of truth. Emet is said many times in those paragraphs. And then we end with the idea of Ga'al Yisrael, praising God as the Redeemer of Israel, or the one who redeemed Israel. I had a wonderful conversation last time I taught a Machzor class with Vered Hoppenstand, who is a grammar teacher at the Academy of Jewish Religion here in California, about the way that blessing, that Chatima, that signature on the blessing, Ga'al Yisrael, is slightly grammatically different than all the other blessings. Seems to point to God having been the Redeemer in a particular circumstance. And what's that circumstance? It's the occasion of crossing the sea to escape from Egypt, because we do this little remembrance of Mi Chamocha beforehand. And as we went over and reviewed last time, it's slightly different here than it is in the evening blessings. So when we get to Ma'ariv in this class, when we get to the evening service in this class, which we'll do next, we're going to hop from Shacharit to Ma'ariv when we finish with morning services because of the structural similarities. Just feels good to have, you'll get to Ma'ariv and you'll say, oh, it's the same content with some different poems around it. But when we get to Ga'al Yisrael in the morning, what I was going to say is between a miniature paragraph. Can you hear me okay? I know I had a little microphone glitch. I'm good?
A little feedback, yeah.
Yeah, but it should go back to it's my USB connection to the computer, but hopefully it will switch back. Has to do with me moving my microphone to my office today.
I do have a question that you mentioned during the first blessing. What else was contained in the first blessing?
What do you mean by that? Like which blessing?
I thought I missed something that you said. something around that first blessing, or maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, in between the Baruch Hu and the first blessing, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir v'nizkechu lanu mehera le'aro, which is on page 31, there's some significant content in there.
There's actually substantial content happening in there. It's not just a little blessing, and it's like a miniature Kedusha, right? There's like a whole section in there, and I'm not just glossing over that. We talked through this a couple classes ago, so you can go back and listen to that. But basically the idea is that before we even get to the first blessing, we do this sort of miniature Kedusha together. So there's this little back and forth that happens. In this class, because we're focused for the most part on how to participate in services, the really critical part is to look at page 30 in the siddur, where this content is found, between the Baruch Hu and the Or Chadash blessing, and notice that there are bolded lines which are transliterated, either on that page or the opposite page, depending on which siddur you're looking at, that tease you, that tell you that you're going to participate in those moments. Do you see that? I could even screen share it for a second so that we can look at it together. This is the little blessing after the Baruch Hu, and then we have this whole paragraph about Hameir La'aretz. This is very small. Let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit while not losing everything. Okay. That we're blessing God for being the illuminator of the whole universe, the creator of these great orbs in the sky. And it's lots of praise and poetry, including this Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey. You see the acrostic poem here, right? Through this whole paragraph, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav. So it's a whole piece of poetry added in there. You know, it's just poetry stuck in there, which is great. Go poetry. But it's just a poem. It's not a blessing itself. It's extra poetic content that's whispered to ourselves. And when you get to the next page, just zoom out a little bit. When you get to the next page, this is what I was talking about, this extra content here from Titbarach, Tsurenu, Malkenu, V'goalenu, Borei, Kedoshim. And then we continue with this theme of praising God's name. And who were the exemplars of praising God's name? The angels in heaven. And so we do this miniature Kedusha here. And because this class is less about the origin of the content and why we do what we do, or in-depth content, I won't get too into why a Kedusha winds up here, this miniature thing. Instead, I want to focus on teaching you how we participate at this point. So let's look at that for just a second. This is good review. We're going back to page 30 here. After the Baruch Hu, you're seated. And then you're whispering to yourself through Hameir La'aretz, through this little poem, El Baruch Gadol Deah, to the next page, page 31, quietly to ourselves, Tiparach Tsurenu Malkenu V'goalenu Borei Kedoshim. We whisper, we whisper, we whisper. And then the person who's leading comes in here. You see that little box? That's where they're leading. You don't have to do anything if you're just participating in the community, but they're going to give you that cue that they're about to come in. Because you're expected here, potentially, is the first place where you might say a little something responsorially out loud. It's as if they're prompting you. When they get to the end of this paragraph, I'll read this out loud. Umaritzimu makdishimu mamlichim. And sometimes people in the kahal, kind of to let the leader who's leading know that they're following along, it's a kind of, hey, I'm with you. They jump in with a quiet, Et Shem Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol HaGibor V'Nara Kadosh Hu. People sometimes jump in with those words. You don't have to. Then the leader is going to come in right here again at the box. They'll do this out loud while you're whispering it to yourself. They're doing this out loud. V'chulam mekablim alehem ol malchut shamayim ze mizeh. They'll read through this whole paragraph till they get to, as they're telling the story of the angels on high, and how they would praise God. They end with this statement, Kulam ke'echad, everyone as one, onim ve'omrim b'yirah, answer and say in awe, in fear. And that's the prompt for Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Meloch ha'aretz kevodo. And so they're prompting that response. It's here in bold, and it's here on the English side of the page, the opposite page, in transliteration. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech ha'aretz kevodo. Right? So that was what I was referring to, was this whole piece of content that comes before the first blessing. There's one more line that we respond with. The leader leads us through this next part. V'ha'ofanim v'chayot kodesh, these two different types of angelic beastly creatures, creaturely beasts, whatever. They're like different types of angels. V'ha'ofanim v'chayot kodesh b'ra'ash gadol, in a great noise. Mit naseim le'umat serafim le'umatam mishabechim ve'omrim. So this is another prompting statement. Like, they praise in this way, and thus they would say, mishabechim, they would praise and say. And then we say, Baruch kivod Adonai mimekomo. And that same sentence is found again in the transliteration here. Baruch kivod Adonai mimekomo. So that's the part of the content that I wanted to point out in terms of participating. There is a little bit of a back and forth that happens in there, and I don't want to skate over it in terms of the outline, even though it's not as essential to the outline of what blessings are being said. It is kind of an essential participation point in services. So if you didn't know that was what was happening, that you're expected to kind of jump in, it is confusing, right? That's all done seated. Ed, was I getting at what you were asking about? That was it?
And that does, look familiar from the Shabbat services, the Kadosh Kadosh. So that is all making sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we get to the Amidah right now and do a little review and deep dive back into there, we'll see again that the Kedusha is present on weekday mornings as well, with these classic lines, Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts, who fills the whole earth with their glory. Melech ha'aretz kevodo. And then Baruch kivod Adonai mimekomo, blessed is the glory of Adonai from their place. Meaning, it's very poetic. Mimekomo, from his place, but makom is also a name from God, a name of God. So it's all play on word poetry. The longer you daven, the more you need those multiple meanings to keep prayer interesting. So I'll keep throwing them at you. So then we get through this little miniature paragraph at the bottom here. Right? And it's a lead up, a poetic lead up that we do quietly whispered until we get to this last blessing. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro Baruch ata Adonai yotzer hame'orot, the creator of the lights. So that's completing thematically the idea that starts after Baruch Hu of Hame'ir la'aretz, the one who illuminates the earth. And there's this whole sandwich in between, and we get to this last blessing. Okay? I'll stop the screen share for a minute so I can go back to reviewing where we wound up last time, which was the Amidah for weekdays, which is a lot like the Amidah on Shabbat, except in the middle, where it diverges greatly. So here we are back at the end of Ga'al Yisrael, right? We've gone through this Or Chadash blessing, Ahava Rabbah blessing, Shema, the Ga'al Yisrael redemption blessing. And then if we're going into a whispered private recitation of the Amidah, which is the normative thing to do there are exceptions to it. But if we're going to a whispered private recitation after Ga'al Yisrael, and then into quiet Amidah, then you on your own are just on your own davening the Amidah. And last time if you want to review the recording of last class, we went through how to navigate the siddur for that whispered private Amidah recitation, right? So how to go through those first blessings and then through the miniature Kedusha, the mini paragraph of it, not the whole thing out loud when you're doing it privately, and then dive into the paragraphs. When you finish with your private Amidah, you then turn back to the beginning of the Amidah again for the repetition of the Amidah, which the leader will lead through. So this week I want to start, last week I started as if you were doing your own private recitation and led you through that way. This week I want to start going through the Amidah as if you've already gotten to say your whole private Amidah, and we're going back for Chazarat HaShatz, the repetition of the leader, the Shaliach Tzibor, it's an acronym. Chazarat HaShatz, Shatz is the acronym, the leader of the service, Shlichat or Shaliach Tzibor. And we're going to go through it as if we're looking in the repetition and talk about what you don't have much responsibility to do while you're just sort of hanging out there waiting for the leader to hit the Kedusha, and then you get to sit down again. Okay, so we're going to look at the beginning of that Amidah together as if you already got to do yours. We're going back to the beginning. Once we get through that, then I want us to go back into the middle paragraphs again. So now we've gotten through our private recitation of the Amidah, and we're going back to the beginning of the Amidah here. We're going to look at page B, assuming that we're in a community where the person leading would lead with the additional names of the matriarchs. And I want to go through the choreography here with you. So let's say we're in person in a minyan, and there's a repetition of the Amidah. You finished your own Amidah. What do you do at that point? Ideally, if your body would allow you to do this, you would remain standing through the first 3 blessings. You're still standing, but you need not stand at attention. When we say our own whispered private Amidah, we remain in a feet together stance in imitation of the angels in a prophetic vision. So our feet stay together during the whole recitation of our own private Amidah. When there's a repetition of the Amidah, only when we get to the Kedusha for 1 page do you need to put your feet together. When we start the repetition of the Amidah, you can just kind of stand there, sway a little bit. You're okay. Just stand like a normal human. Just stand. And then the leader begins, and the leader has choreography. Do you have to bow on these bowing places on this page? No, you already did your bows, right? Jackie's shaking her head. We already did all of our choreography, all of our bowing in our own private Amidah. There's only 1 place, and I'll show you when we get to it. We might even sneak all the way up to it today. We'll see. Probably not, but maybe. There's 1 place where we bow in the repetition, and that's it. It's not even a full bow. You'll see. So we don't need to do any of the bowing. The leader is bowing. Baruch atah Adoshem. They're bowing. And we might respond here. Baruch hu uvaruch shemo, a phrase which we find in Baruch She'amar, embedded in that first line from Pesukei to Zimra, which is just, blessed is God and blessed be God's name. Some people automatically kind of spit that out in response to the beginning of a blessing. You can hear that in prayer spaces. It's a congregational response to interject into blessings. I have a long list of reasons why I prefer not to do that or to instruct people to do that, because there are so many times where there's actually an interruption of a blessing that someone's saying on your behalf. So better to err on the side of not saying it. But some people do, and it's just kind of a habit. Baruch atah Adoshem, and the congregation might respond, Baruch Shemo, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoteinu. You might hear that. So they're going to go through this whole page. They're going to skip the stuff, hopefully, that they're supposed to skip, hopefully. Okay? And they're going to get through the bottom of this page right here as far as they're going to go. V'ne'eman atah lehachayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayei hameitim. And then it says right here the instruction that happens next. When the Amidah is chanted aloud, continue on page 37, right? Because what's this right here? You remember? What's this little paragraph? What's happening at Atah Kadosh? When do we say that? We don't say it here. We say it only when we recite our own private whispered Amidah. So this is where we go. So when we're doing it in a whisper, Baruch atah Adoshem mechayei hameitim, Atah Kadosh v'Shucha Kadosh El HaKadosh, and then we skip the big Kedusha. Okay? So when the person's leading out loud, they're going to go from this line, Mechayei hameitim, and they're going to go to page 37. This is the part where in the repetition, you have a job to do choreographically. So you're going to stand, you're going to remain standing, it would be standing, and you're going to put your feet together like you're an angel. Okay? You're going to put your feet together, standing with the feet together, staying standing like as if you are a chess piece and you only have 1 limb to stand on. And the person leading is going to wait for the congregation to whisper each of these sets of lines, the non-bolded sets of lines. They're going to whisper it there. Okay? And so if you're in the kahal, you're in the congregation, you're whispering, you're whispering that, and then the person leading is going to hop in on top of you. Nikadesh shimcha ba'olam kashem shemakti shimoto bishmi marom kakatu al yad niviecha. And when you get to this next part, and when they get to this next part, each of you is going to do the following. You're going to turn left, you're going to turn right, and you're going to bow forward. Or right, left, forward. To the side, to the side, to the center. Vikara ze el ze ve'amar. And they called one to the other, and they said, the angels would call one to the other. That's why we're bowing, we're bowing, we're bowing. And then everybody together, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Meloch haaretz kevodo. And there's that familiar line from the Kedusha, which you might know from Shabbat Kedusha, and you might know from any weekday Kedusha. Then the leader is going to say this line, Le'umatam baruch yomeru, and everyone together may rise on their feet at the name of God, Baruch kevod Adonai mimekomo. So in the first bold line here, let me go back to the beginning of the choreography again. Vikara ze el ze ve'amar, side to side forward. Then Kadosh, 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 each on a tippy toe. Adonai tzva'ot meloch haaretz kevodo. Wait for this prompting line. Le'umatam baruch yomeru. And then we go up Baruch kevod Adonai mi mekomo. Then just the leader says Uvdivrei kodecha katu le'mor. One last time to our toes. Yimloch Adonai leolam Elohayech Tzion lidor vador hallelujah. The leader reads this whole paragraph, finishes Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. We say Amen, and we're seated. Any questions on the choreography of that paragraph or what comes before it?
At what point did you say on you go on your toes? I know where we do the left, right, and center, but
right. So after the left, right, center, we go to our toes for Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy. That's the only time that we do 3 in a row. That's a nice way to remember it. Yep. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. 3 in a row, 3 up on our toes. And then just for the names of God on those next 2 bold lines. Baruch kevod Adonai mi mekomo, and Yimloch Adonai leolam. Very good. And then we finish, after we hear Ha'el HaKadosh, we can be seated. I want to say something else about the choreography of the service here that's also a callback to something I asked about a couple weeks ago. I started off class a couple weeks ago asking people to sort of name green light, yellow light, and red light times in the service to talk. So if I can go back for a moment here to the prayer skeleton, and we were talking about the way that there's really kind of a yellow light zone. Like you can whisper and talk a little, but don't kind of talk wildly out loud. For all of Birkot HaShachar, and probably for most of Pesukei de Zimra, but once we get to Yishtabach, we consider ourselves sort of in a red zone. Like we don't deliberately talk to the people around us, and we try not to interrupt by calling page numbers, right? So so we start at Yishtabach in this quiet red zone, and that continues through the recitation of the private whispered Amidah, and then that sort of red zone ends.
In the repetition of the Amidah, when we finish that Ha'el HaKadosh, we go back into kind of a yellow/green zone of talking. And this is important on Torah reading days, right? Because what are you going to do there?
You're going to talk.
Yeah, you're gonna be able to talk to your neighbors, and there's some important work that needs to be done in the room. So what could be done during that time?
That's when they give out the aliyahs, right?
Yes, exactly, Steve. Great. Yeah. So that's when
the Gabbai in the room, which is the name of the person who sort of is the stage manager, right? That's when the Gabbai in the room kind of looks around to see who is present. Are there any special guests? Is there anybody who's, commemorating a yahrzeit, the death of a loved one, and tries to identify in the room, and then might come over. They might tap you on the shoulder, actually, right? So they might even say, "Hi, welcome. Glad to have you here. Would you like to take this aliyah, or would you like to lift and wrap the Torah? Hagba Galila. So that's when honors are typically given out during the repetition of the Amidah. That makes sense? I mean, to me, it kind of makes sense, but it also is kind of lousy to the person who's leading, right? There's also something, there's something else that we sometimes do, which I really, really miss during this COVID era. I think you'll see why in a minute. Does anyone else know what the other, thing is that we do during the repetition of the Amidah? There's this whole thing. There's a whole practice we do. In addition to handing out aliyot, it's also customary to give tzedakah during that time. So in some communities, a pushke, that's a Yiddish word for just a little, collection box, is passed around. And in some places, people walk up to put money in the tzedakah box. You'll see there's a paragraph in the middle of the Amidah, which we're about to get to, that directly references tzedakah, tzedek umishpat, and some people give during that paragraph itself. But in general, it's this really nice practice to give tzedakah during the repetition of the Amidah. So during a non-COVID era, that's also easier because you can pass things around and all that. Very hard to do on digital. I mean, I suppose we can use one of those churches have designed digital collection plates via apps. So I guess we could do that if we wanted to. That'd be kind of fun to collect in that way. Text to give, exactly. You text to give during the text tzedakah now. No one would spell it right. So that's what we do during that time. Does anyone have questions about that sort of that choreography in that moment? The talking, the not talking, what we do with the handing out the honors. We good? So let's look at the content again. We'll go back to the siddur. Once we get past the kedusha, we're back into the mode that we started last time. We started looking into atachonen ledam da'at umelamed le'nosh bina. I talked about this idea of having a practice of marginalia, of writing in your margins or doodling in your margins and giving yourself highlights of things to focus on and pray about, even if you didn't understand every word or couldn't catch every word while you're praying it in the Hebrew, while you're working on that skill. And we got as far last week, and in this paragraph, as Salach lanu avinu ki chatanu, which you probably recognize from High Holy Day texts, Mechal lanu malkenu ki fashanu, praying for God to forgive us. It's a mini vidui. Some people, I'm not sure if I got to mentioning this last week, some people actually do a little beating on their chest every time they recite this part, both privately and also in the repetition of the Amidah. Salach lanu avinu ki chatanu, mechal lanu malkenu ki fashanu. You might recognize from Ashamnu or from Vidui the Al Chaitz in the High Holy Day season. It's just a way to engage bodily. For some people, it's particularly meaningful. There's no requirement to do it, but you might see people doing it, right? So that's part of the choreography of doing a private Amidah for some people. Re'ena ve'onyenu, ve'riva rivenu. This one is like the tongue twistery-est of twisters. Let's see. So, see our sorrow, right? Look at our sorrow and redeem us quickly for the sake of your name. Ki goel chazak ata, because you are a strong goel. Would you recognize this root from somewhere earlier in the Amidah? Gimel Aleph Lamed, goel chazak ata. Goel is Gaal Yisrael, right? The redemption. So because you are a strong redeemer, you are. Baruch atah Adonai, Goel Yisrael. See the difference between that and Gaal Yisrael? Gaal Yisrael is referring to a particular miracle that happened, the redemption at the sea. This is, see our sorrow and please redeem us in an ongoing way. And then blessing God as being an ongoing redeemer. This is an interesting grammatical choice. I want to point out one other thing, which is that na here, you might recognize, anyone know the prayer from the Torah itself that Moshe says for Miriam? Ana, Refana, La, Elna, Refana, La, right? Na, or Ana, it sometimes shows up and it sometimes doesn't. It's this like extreme, I'm sure there's a great grammatical term for this, but it's basically emphatic extra language. Sometimes you'll see it appear in a siddur. Sometimes you'll see it appear extra. Sometimes it won't show up at all. But it's just an extra word. Re'e na. Re'e ve'onyenu would be fine. Re'e na ve'onyenu is please. Come on. Ana, na. One of the places where I sometimes get tripped up with this is that different versions of the El Malei Rachamim prayer, the memorial prayer for the deceased, some of them have na or ana in them. Ana bal rachamim. Some don't, right? Some just skip that word, ana or na, because it's this extra please word. Just pointing that out. It's a beautiful feature of Hebrew. Na ve'onyenu. Rifa'enu Adonai v'nerafe. Heal us, God, and we will be healed. Hoshienu v'nivashea. Save us and we'll be saved. Ki tehilatenu ata. Because you're our tehillah. You're our pray. You're our praise. Like you are the one who is the source of and the receiver of prayer, tehillah. V'ha'alei refuah shlema lechol makotenu, and bring upon us on high a complete healing for all of our makot, all the things that are ailing us. And then, if you are in your whispered private Amidah, you can insert this individual Mishaberach prayer. Right now we're going through this as if there was somebody leading from up front. Shliach or Shlichat Tzibor would not add a private prayer or name right here. They just wouldn't. That's not part of the practice of the Amidah to have the leader say that out loud. It's a private practice. And when you finish inserting somebody's name here and praying for their well-being, you pick up again the rest of the paragraph. Ki el melech rofeh ne'eman v'rachaman ata, because you are a God, a sovereign who heals, rofeh, ne'eman, a true or a faithful healer, v'rachaman, and merciful you are. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh cholei amo Yisrael, the one who is the healer of the sick of their people Israel. You'll see a little note at the bottom of this page that on a public fast day, in the repetition of the Amidah, something would get inserted right here. Anenu, the Anenu paragraph. So most days that doesn't happen, but on a public fast day that also falls on a weekday, this is where the reader out loud, the reader being the stand-in for Shliach Tzibor, the person leading the service, that's where they would insert the special paragraph for a fast day. So most days we just go Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, and we go to the next paragraph. And then something a little less personal, and we're zooming out to slightly different kinds of prayers. Barech Aleinu Adonai Eloheinu et hashana hazot. Bless upon us, God, our Lord, this year, Shana hazot. V'et kol minei tuvuata letova, and all of this, I guess, species, varieties of produce, of good for good. And then there's a seasonal edition. So you have to follow the instructions. If it's between Pesach and December 4th, as in now, then we put in this insertion. And then from December 5th to Pesach, which is a changeover that's happening soon, we add in the winter blessing. What do you recognize in the winter blessing? V'tein tal umatar livracha. What is that asking God to do? V'tein, put, tal umatar livracha. What will we be asking God to do in the winter season for the well-being of our produce?
Rain. Some rain.
Yeah, different types of dew and morning. I guess there's another word for dew. 2 different types of dew. The appropriate kind of wetness to help our produce get through this season. V'tein tal umatar livracha. Al panei ha'adama, on the face of the earth, v'sabe'enu mituvah, and satiate us from your goodness. Uvarech shanatenu kashanim hatovot, and that you should bless our year like the good years. Baruch atah Adonai mivarech hashanim, the blesser of the years. And that blessing, like all of the blessings when we're talking about land, is really intended to be a blessing for Eretz Yisrael. It's dependent and reliant on imagining the seasons that are happening there. So it's our brain kind of thematically going to praying for the land of Israel and its well-being. You can drosh it out and say also for the produce here in our land, but it really is a prayer for the produce in the land of Israel. Tikah b'shofar gadol lecherutenu. Sound off the horn, the great horn of our freedom. V'sanes lekabetz galuyotenu. And you should lift up a miracle to ingather our galut, our multiple exiles. V'kabetzenu yachad me'arba kanfot haaretz. That language is familiar, right? V'kabetzenu yachad me'arba kanfot haaretz. Does that sound familiar? We had that earlier in our siddur. It's in the V'havienu l'shalom paragraph right before Ohev Amo Yisrael, right? V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz. We pray often for God to do this, but this is the vision, the idea of an ingathering of the exiles from the four corners of the earth. And so we're praying that God be the mikabetz nidchei Amo Yisrael, the one who is doing the ingathering of his people. Here's one that's relevant for tonight. Hashiva shofetenu kevarishona. Return to us our judges as they were in the old days. Kevarishona. V'yoatzenu kevatechila v'haser mimenu yagon va'anacha. So basically, return us to the fair and just judges from the original days, and remove from us terribleness and sorrow. Umloch aleinu ata Adonai levadcha. And rule over us, you, Adonai, alone, by yourselfness. Levadcha is a cool construction. Bechesed uvrachamim, in graciousness, in loving kindness, and in mercies. V'tzadkenu b'mishpat. And you should judge us in judgment, by your word. So let the justices and the judges who surround us be returned to us like they once were, God, the fair ones in the days of old, and let you be the only one who is the ultimate sovereign over the earth. I want to point out, though this may disappoint you since it's election night and it'd be a cool drosh on this, but I want to point out that all of these concepts, starting with Barech Aleinu, Tikah b'shofar gadol lecherutenu, Hashiva shofetenu kevarishona, all of them are imagining Israel as a sovereign nation. So we're really talking about return to us a system of judges for the people Israel in the land of Israel, right? This is all a very redemptive, end days, bring us all together prayer. But the sentiment might move you to pray for other things in your life that this reminds you of, like having fair governance. That's important wherever you live, and particularly relevant tonight. We skip over this line. We only say it once a year between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days between those two holidays. This next line is sometimes whispered. V'la malshinim al tehi tikva, and to the naysayers, the wicked ones, don't give them any hope. V'chol arisha kerega toved. You should let's see, how do they, it's going to take me too long to translate. Let all evil soon disappear. Let all your enemies soon be destroyed. V'chol harisha kerega toved. I guess, all the evil, wicked ones in a moment, they should be disappeared. I didn't do a much better job than they did, but that's okay. It informed me. V'chol oyevecha mehera yikaretu. You should cut off quickly all of your enemies. V'hazedi mehera te'aker u'tshaber u'tmager v'tachnia b'mehera v'yameinu. All of these terrible meaning folks, you should quickly uproot them and destroy them and make them, go away quickly in our days. Bimhera v'yameinu. All these are words for getting them out from among us. Baruch atah Adonai shover oyavim, the destroyer of enemies. Umachnia zedin. That's such a great word, lehachnia. The one who causes the arrogant to be humble. It's really cool. And kind of controversial, which is why we whisper it, right? Because can you imagine being amongst people who might be listening, big brother, and therefore there's a tradition that we might whisper it also because, like, do we really want to say this so strongly out loud? It's just a whispered thought. And then we go to the positive, related thought. Ala tzadikim, on the other hand, the righteous ones, ve'ala chasidim, and the pious ones, ve'al ziknei amecha beit Yisrael, and on the elderly one, the elders of your people, the house of Israel, ve'al pleitat sofreihem, and on the remnant of your scribes, ve'al gerei hatzedek ve'aleinu, all the ger tzedeks, all the people who choose Judaism in good faith, ve'aleinu, and us. Yehemuna rachamecha Adonai Eloheinu, v'tein sachar tov l'chol habotachim b'shimcha be'emet. Bring down your mercy. Oh, you see that na there again? See? That's just an extra word. Some siddurim have Yehemu rachamecha, some Yehemuna rachamecha Adonai Eloheinu, v'tein sachar tov, and give, pardon me, good fortune, l'chol habotachim b'shimcha be'emet, to all those who trust in, who are trusters in your true name. V'sim chalkeinu imahem, and put our portion with theirs. I love that line. V'sim chalkeinu imahem. However you're judging the righteous ones, put our portion, our good fortune, with theirs. U'le'olam, and forever. Lo nevosh ki v'cha batachnu. Don't destroy us, we shall not be destroyed. Ki v'cha batachnu, because in you we trust. Because remember, we said, give sachar tov, give good fortune to everyone who trusts in you, and we're going to trust you forever. We're going to put our faith in you forever. God, Baruch atah Adonai mishan mivtach letzadikim, the one who is a basically offers good fortunate trust to those who are righteous, to the righteous ones. Some of these paragraphs, the Lamalshinim and Tzadikim, have a lot of sectarian roots. We're not going to get too into that, but like they referred to specific groups of people when they were initially added to the Amidah. Today, they carry the meaning that you give it. And now we're going to turn to Jerusalem, the idea. Into your city of Jerusalem, in mercy, return. V'tishkom b'tocha kasher dibarta. You should dwell in it like you said. Uvnei otah. Bekarov b'yameinu binyan olam. You should build it quickly in our days, a forever place to dwell. V'chisei David mehera v'tocha tachin. And the seed of David should quickly be placed within it. What does that mean? What's the seed of David? It's the Davidic line that's going to lead to our redemption. It's going back to the redemption theme. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God, Bonei Yerushalayim, the builder of Jerusalem. We used to joke about construction the year that we were in Jerusalem and saying God was the Bonei Yerushalayim because there's so much construction in that city. Et samach David avdecha mehirat hatzmiach. Now we're getting really into the Mashiach land, into Messiah territory, and the seed of David. Speaking of Kisei David, and the seed of David, Abdecha, your servant, Mehirat Tatzmiach, you should plant. V'karnot harum bishuatecha ki lishuatcha kivinu kol hayom. Save us, because we trust in your saving, and we are intended towards it every single day. Baruch atah Adonai matzmiach keren Yeshua, the one who is going to implant the horn of salvation, who is assuring us. I like that, matzmiach. Who is, that's like a poetic way of saying that. Sure, who is ensuring the horn of our salvation, the redemption that's coming. And then Shema Kolenu, which again is familiar to the Selichot and the High Holy Day literature. Here, our voice, singular, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus v'racham aleinu, again, similar language to the Salach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu, right? It's this redeem us, forgive us for our sins. V'kabel b'rachami muvratzona tefilatenu. We're getting close to the end of our prayers. Receive in mercy and in desire our prayer, singular, meaning collective prayer. Ki el shomea tefilot v'tachanunim ata, because you are a hearer of prayers and of supplications, that you are. Umilfanecha, and before you, Malkeinu, our sovereign, rekam al tashivenu. I love that. I don't like this translation either. Don't leave us bereft of your return. Ki ata shomea tefilat amacha Yisrael barachamim, because you are the hearer of the prayer of your people Israel in mercy. Baruch atah Adonai shomea tefillah. We bless God as the one who hears prayer. And that's nearly the end of our entire prayer section. We get to Ritzei. And Ritzei, we return back to the same prayers we have on Shabbat. These are the end of the 13 sandwichy blessings, and we're back to Ritzei. And once you hit Ritzei in any Amidah, any time of year, you're in the home stretch. Ritzei is in Shabbat morning prayer is exactly identical. From here on out, identical to Shabbat morning liturgy. No difference. There's not a single word different. Here to the Shabbat morning liturgy, from Ritzei to the end. Just like there wasn't from the beginning up until the Kedusha, with the exception of the fact that the shape of the Kedusha that we do as a whole congregation is different on a weekday than it is on Shabbat. So, we got as far as Ritzei. Thoughts, questions on these interim brachot, on what you do when you know what to do when there's repetition of the Amidah. You talk over it. But when you do it on your own, you actually pray each of these things individually, theoretically. Any questions or thoughts on that interim section or on where we landed? No? That's it? Okay.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.